It's really
Yeah,
nice.
yeah.
So, are we good? Yes. Okay. Would you please clap your hands?
And then I look at you,
Yeah, always me.
always you, and
Camera
then
does not exist. If you want
okay,
to look at Iris, it's you can do that too.
and then tell me when I slouch or something. I'm a horrible sloucher.
You can.
You'll
Yeah,
you'll keep
you
me
can definitely
looking
like
okay.
rephrase things.
Right.
It's really, we have two cams. It's really super easy. There's
Okay.
no problem.
Great.
But the first question that I have is like, what does it take to do? How do you become a title sequence designer? Even though that's not all that you do in your professional life, but do you have to? What do you have to study? What was your background?
Right.
And,
My specific background,
well,
yeah.
and if you could like,
Okay.
mix the two. And
Yeah. Well, the wonderful thing about being a title designer is it's really a hybrid of so many different forms. Like there's graphic design, obviously cinematography, the language of film, often animation, and because you're often doing things metaphorically, all kinds of styles from, you can be into collage, you can do illustration. So what I love about it is that you could, take from any kinds of genres and types of art and be able to create sort of like a short film that it doesn't necessarily have to be literal. It could be very abstract. And so what kind of what kind of background for a tile designer? I mean, I feel like you can come at it from so many ways. Like I personally came into tile design through graphic design. I originally wanted to be a print design or design children's books, which I still may do someday. But the marriage of word and image was always very interesting to me. But one thing I always loved to do was create animated films, even when I was a child with a Super 8 camera, moving objects and paper around and click, 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 and making your own little cartoons. I thought it was just magical how you can make a drawing move, how you can make inanimate objects move, how things can transform. And that became, something of interest as I studied graphic design. And that at the time when I was studying graphic design, one of the things that was really on everybody's radar, and this was in the early 90s, was CD-ROMs and this, like animation that could be, expressive in a new way, not just like, not like just classical Disney animation, right? And so I actually did an animated alphabet book as one of my student projects, and it caught the eye of Kyle Cooper, who's working a lot in title design. And actually one of my professors at school said, hey, maybe you would think of working in film titles. And I had not really even thought about that. But he said, the way you are taking things and transitioning them and the ideas change, that's very cinematic. And that to me was sort of eye-opening, because cinematic to me always meant sort of like a big film like Lawrence of Arabia or something. But the idea that your drawings and the way you're doing type and how things could transform, that was a way of doing cinema, I think really opened my eyes and led me to this area of work.
Is it okay? Is it back?
It's back? It's like a...
It's back on. It's the AC.
Oh dear.
But it comes from another... Ça vient de là?
No, it's coming from here.
It's from here.
Do you want me to go back and find the tech
Ah, ça
person?
serait celle d'une autre pièce qui passerait par-dessus, là.
Yeah, I don't know if Alex can kind of hang out, maybe in case you need things from her. I think she could be fine doing that. I've done interviews where people kind of hang out and they're like, okay, if you need something, we can get it for you right away. So, do you need me to break up things more so you can edit with
right
it?
Now, no. It's
Okay.
more about the process of
Okay.
the actual making. It's perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's so funny because as we're both filmmakers, I'm like, oh, make sure, take a breath, they can edit with it,
No problem. Relaxed about it. It's sort of mashup idea of like
Yeah.
graphic design filmmaking. That's really interesting.
Yeah, mashup, hybrid. I think I love that's just a hybrid idea. And then coming at it from music, like so many editors come at it from music. And so music is such a powerful part of the title sequence, the rhythm and the editing and even the score. They're almost like some people have called them little short films before the show. Other people say they're almost like little music videos. So all those sort of skill sets kind of come into this thing. But I think what's interesting is in this art form is that you're supposed to suggest an even larger world outside what you see in the 30 or 60 or 90 seconds. Like it's supposed to evoke, hopefully what will be years of viewing. So, there's that challenge of taking a little kernel of something and teasing it out and making somebody want to go deeper and deeper, it's a little bit like at the beginning of a meal, it's been compared to, the appetizer and amuse-bouche, like where you just get a little taste and suddenly, even if you didn't think you were hungry, that taste made you desire it and want to, eat even more or go, and all of a sudden, you can't wait for the next course, right? So hopefully, yeah.
On enregistre là, toujours voilà. We're just gonna wait 1 minute for Iris to come back. Otherwise, we'll just keep going.
That's a good name for a filmmaker, Iris.
Tu crois qu'on... C'est correct là, c'est exploitable, tu penses? Là, c'est quelle source que t'as? Un mix des deux?
Enfin, j'ai ignoré le chef.
D'accord.
Pardon? Ils savent pas d'où ça vient. Parce que c'est juste le power, kind of.
Le power.
Should we just...
Let's see, so, we've not had this
Well,
problem.
They know if they find it, they'll just stop it. What?
It's just the sound of computers being on and
Oh, the hum of this is it the hum of
It's
this
the
computer?
hum.
Or is it something...
Bah ouais, mais en fait, c'est relié à l'espace principal.
Ouais,
J'ai
Ouais,
l'impression
mais ça a commencé d'un coup, c'est pour ça que c'est étonnant, c'est tout. Sinon,
que tu initié.
it just started like out of nowhere. That's why it wasn't there earlier.
This
Oh,
bu-
that.
and right, this whole hum.
It's like a big
I think
fridge.
it's coming this way. The noise.
Oh yeah, I see what it did.
And it's also like it's vibrating a little bit. So
Yeah.
It's really a problem, but
It's... I don't know, because it's not linked to the other room. Tu vois, c'est séparé en fait ça de l'autre pièce. Du coup, je sais pas d'où ça peut venir.
okay. Let's
Let's
just hope
see.
it disappears.
Does Easton or Larry know? Or
Yeah, I can let me grab him again.
maybe have him
So
come
we'll just-
have him come up here and so they can hear it. I guess. Thanks.
Tu veux continuer? Moi, je me mets là et quand elle arrête de parler, je leur dis de venir.
So, on va continuer. Okay, we'll just keep going and if better happens, then we will.
Trying to think, is there any other spot to... This is the quietest spot, that's the thing. I do kind of hear it.
It sounds like a fridge or something, very like.
It's not the...
No, it
No,
comes from
it's
that.
up there.
It's a hum.
Yeah. Anyway, what?
Continue.
Yeah.
You can always go with that little room downstairs.
And so, at the time when you were studying those things, and it was, I guess, the digital age was, sort of actually getting born. I mean, it was.
It was like exploding.
So, how did that influence the tile design sequence world? I guess it changed everything. Okay. It just stopped. It just stopped like right a second ago.
There's no mini fridge in here, right, or anything?
I don't think so.
Is that unplugged?
No, but it comes from here.
Yeah.
It
It's a
just
hum.
stops. We'll just take the occasion and do the interview like that.
Okay.
Thank you for helping us.
Yeah. Sorry.
Do we need to buzz you if it doesn't, or maybe it reaches a certain temperature and it doesn't, and it stops or
Well,
something?
my point is
Yeah.
that they became much more sophisticated.
Yes,
and there's
yeah.
a reason for that is that the networks wanted more sophisticated stories, and title sequences, but also because the technology was enabling something
Right.
more sophisticated.
Well, I think there's a couple of
3
things. Oh,
seconds
sorry.
after.
Right. So at least it's not like New York. Did you
Yeah.
get any in New York where it's like, oh, great, truck. Verite.
Yeah,
Okay.
if we have the shots.
Right?
And yeah.
Get some excitement into this
Yeah.
profession. Well, I think there's many things that contributed to the sort of like rise and attention given to titles in this moment. It can't be discounted that, as, in the 90s into the 2000s, like the means of producing film and particularly layered film where you could combine type with live action or more complicated CG models and graphics, that became more sophisticated and easier. There was a revolution in how we did these things. I'm kind of old school. I started my career doing film titles, and I still remember we'd go and get them shot on the Oxberry and use opticals, and you'd have this extremely expensive and sort of complicated process to kind of burn, double burn a negative. And even then, when you did it digitally, you would have very expensive equipment to composite, which means when you stack images or graphics on top of image, you have two images, a double exposure kind of together. Compositing was a very expensive way to, method of creating film before, but with the advent of sort of digital compositing, desktop animation, just being able to scan things into the, and use them in the computer. One thing I've always loved about working with computers is that it doesn't have to look like it was made by a computer. Even in school, I always cut out things from magazines and scanned them in, or drew my own drawings and blew it up on a Xerox machine or a fax machine, and scan it back in for texture. I remember for one project we scanned meat, to give us a texture. So it's this wonderful collage box that you can play with, and you can, digital is not by nature, it's not a tactile thing. Everything has the same pixels and it's smooth and it's a screen, but you can get that tactile, a visceral, feeling from any number of techniques of how you shoot and what textures you put into it and how you manipulate them. And so I feel like, it's only gotten, more, artists are given even just more options of how to manipulate photography and footage and drawings in the computer. And that's definitely contributed to some sophisticated ideas in animation and design that probably would have been very, very difficult, if not maybe near impossible to do even just a couple decades ago. And then I think the rise of titles, I think it's wonderful that, I think another, reason why titles have become so prominent, delightfully so for a title designer, is that the rise of sort of like cable television and now streaming television has made it so, titles can have a presence within the series that can function, metaphorically or iconically for the series. When some of my first title sequences when working in television, it was very, very, very important that you show the actors' faces very big or a long time because, people would flip through channels and they'd have to catch something. And the title would almost be like an advertisement to draw people in and stay on the channel. And, there are many channels and stations where that still is the case. But now I have meetings with showrunners, and I always ask, like, do you, how is it important to show a particular character or the whole cast? And a lot of times they'll say, no, we don't even want to show the cast. Obviously now with the way television is, sometimes part of the cast gets killed off, or you never know who's going to continue on. So it's less about making this ensemble advertisement, and maybe more of the ideas and the tone that is going into, into some of these shows. I think. There was, I think, when one of the groundbreaking, series and titles was The Sopranos, for instance. And I think at that era, we were just getting used to this idea of television, quote, being like film, premium television, and I feel like the title sequence was a language that film had that was brought over to television, but now television is really upping the ante, and they're becoming, even more sophisticated because of the way television's grown. Is that sort of answering?
I can see that. Even though today it's really rare to have interesting film titles, I would say. When you have like maybe 15 or 20 opening titles for TV series a year that are really interesting and well made.
Yeah, no, that's a flip though, because in the 90s, or when you were young, like you had title sequences for television that were iconic, right? But a lot of times they were like cut scenes of the, thinking back pre-HBO, pre-cable, more network television, and there would be some gems, but a lot, and certainly these title sequences, I love them, are iconic in their own ways, partly because of the music. Music's so important. I can still hear like the theme song of Wonder Woman or Three's Company or any number of shows on network television, and it's almost like this visceral response, like, oh, that that show comes back to me. But for the most part, a lot of the title sequences, decades ago, were a lot of clips from shows or showing, or maybe there'd be a special shot sequence, but a lot of times it would feature the cast. I mean, we started to move into more abstraction. We did actually very early titles like for Ally McBeal or other shows that.
Tell us about that.
Abstracted. Yeah, no, it's like there was always we came to it because we had at the time, and speaking of film titles, so we at Imaginary Forces have a huge history of doing film titles as well, and perhaps in the beginning of our studio, we're most known for film titles, and that was an era actually where the film titles seemed more elaborate at the time. They were longer, right? They were a minute, 2 minutes, whereas a television title on network television can often just be a title card or very quick, right? Because you're taking up commercial time. But we did very elaborate film titles and or very evocative film titles, and you would see. Kyle Cooper's titles for Seven or something, and that would be this iconic opener for this film, and people would look at that. We worked on everything from Mission Impossible to Charlie's Angels the movie to the Pink Panther to so we would do these. I feel like the language of title design kind of first made a splash in film. And then I think as television became more premium, or because you have to remember there was that revolution in television that became more cable, more sophisticated, more daring, more, the content much more mature storylines. As that was evolving, they still, I think, were borrowing a lot of the language from film. Because that speaks of a sort of premium cinematic language. It's funny now I've done titles even for video games where it's like, oh, you want the words, the word we always use is like sort of is a cinematic experience, right? So it's evoking this theatrical grandeur, right? And I think television at first borrowed that almost to up the ante in some of these cable shows. And now you're absolutely right that it's flipped, where I feel like now a lot of the more artistic or a lot of the more elaborate or more considered titles are now going on television as opposed to film. But these are all things that also sometimes go in cycles. We've seen, explosions where people want very elaborate opening sequences, and then they want very elaborate end sequences, and then just a title card and go right into it. So it goes, they go in waves.
But you mentioned Alan McBeal. I want to know about that if you worked on it. Did you work on it?
I was not the designer on that, so I don't know all the ins and outs. I was here when it was done, but we worked with David E. Kelley on many of his shows. And that was, and we would always try to bring that sensibility of a film title into the television, meaning that it wasn't going to be a classic title of like the big turning head and the actor's name. Even if we did show the cast, we were, sometimes we would find techniques that, and we'd look at a lot of art and treat a lot of the footage. So perhaps it had a more abstract quality that more spoke to the tone of the show then perhaps the kind of billboard way that these network television shows would often showcase their stars. I don't know if that makes sense. Do you know the Ally McBeal sequence? It's kind of textural and it's a treated,
And my viewers might not, so can you?
I haven't seen it. I'm not intimate with that one, so it's really hard to really.
I like the sort of that time in television. I think was really great. I like the ER titles as well.
Yeah, those are great
They're
titles.
not
Yeah.
Artistically great. That's sort of something that actually is interesting to me because your job is to make beautiful things, and sometimes some titles that we remember are not. If you see titles from the 90s or the 80s, they're not always very beautiful graphically. They touch a different chord.
Well, I think the first job of a title sequence is to really articulate the tone of the show, and to me, what a successful title sequence does is it shows. Let's see what I'm trying to say here. To me, a title sequence is successful when it can't go on any other show than the one it's attached to. So it kind of separates the show from the pack. It differentiates it. It gives it, the title sequence is an icon for, that represents the show and represents what's unique about it. And whether it's the tone or a certain aesthetic or just, often the most successful title sequences, it's about a feeling that you get. And that is so much about the combination of things, it's the music. Music, I was, just joking, it's like 85% of it, of this, just sort of like right to your gut reaction. And there's so much, or if there's a symbol of that it evokes from the show. And then there is no discounting, of course, how successful the show is itself, because it's like any logo or any it's so funny. It's like, what is special about the Lacoste?
Some basic settings that need your permission.
Whoops.
Just go into the Google Assistant settings on your phone.
Hello, Google. What do you know about title sequences? Anyway, should we turn that? I could turn that off. Should we turn that off? There's a little button. I think it's recording our every word, so perhaps maybe.
Turn off.
Oh yeah, there's a little button in the back. Yeah, there's a thing. No, on the Google Home itself. On the thing. Yeah, that's the Google Home. See, there's a little button on the base. I can do it. Whoop.
The mic is muted.
It should be. Oh, the mic is muted. Yeah, it should be.
But
Yeah. Good. So now he's off. Whoops. Robots. Someday robots can do our title sequences. What were we? Oh, so yeah. So there's. Sorry.
Elle bouge énormément.
Ouais, mais là, par exemple, là, elle s'est assise vachement à gauche.
Si tu veux, mais après, d'habitude, dès qu'elle bouge, je suis obligé de faire un peu.
Attends, regardons comment elle s'assoit. Check the shot. Oh, okay.
Right. Posture, teeth, all good. Most importantly, no. Okay, so where were we? We were saying, the success, or what, so we're saying, the show, a television show will often take a life of its own, so viewers will, grab onto things that they can make symbols or connect to the show, and that's always fascinating and wonderful. Okay. Oh, yeah.
We'll get there.
The sun's gonna come. We're losing the light.
Ok. On est libre là. On met les avions dans le background, c'est pas grave.
Should I clap again?
All right. So the success of a title sequence.
A success of the title sequence, I mean, you can't discount the success of the show itself, because, as you know, a television show will take a life of its own, and it's fascinating and wonderful how viewers will connect, something like the typography or an element of the title sequence, even the logo card, or the music especially, and really hang on to it as a symbol of the show.
Did you talk to some people about that? Did you get feedback from the audiences, or do you see that happening with parodies on the internet from the titles? Sometimes people make their own title sequence out of a real one.
Yeah, no, it's really wonderful. Like I had mentioned that I've always wanted to work in children's book, and actually one of the first things I did was work in public television on a children's show, an animated show. Because I love, one of my idols was the woman who created Sesame Street, the educational program with animation and everything, and the Muppets, of course. And one of my biggest thrills was when somebody forwarded, when Sesame Street did a parody of Boardwalk Empire and called it Birdwalk Empire. But what really tickled me is because when you're a tile designer, you're slaving over all these really small details, like this minutia over, because you only get 90 seconds or something, or 30 seconds, so you're doing all these really small things, and sometimes you're wondering, are people going to notice? But it's so great when I saw this parody, because just the way they had Big Bird's feet land in the sand, and we had reversed the footage so the water goes reverse, and then we had bottles in the water, but they, I believe, had saltines or something in they had all these details, but just substituted them with the the Big Bird Sesame Street equivalents was really flattering, because it's like you're like, oh, to see that people were noticing and trying to make sense of it was really gratifying. And then, of course, when a show launches into the world with your titles on them, you do look for feedback, and sometimes you don't get it for a little bit. I mean, similar with Boardwalk Empire, one of the most gratifying things was in season 3, people would say, "Oh, you designed, those titles, now that I'm in season 3 or I've been watching it, they make even more sense, or I get why you guys did that," and that's really nice when you can have designed a title sequence that almost can kind of grow with the series. It's always your hope, of course, when you work on a show, that this will be on the air for years to come, and you're working with the showrunner to try to put maybe even themes in that might not even make sense till the end of the season or the next season. And so when people get to that point, that's very, that's super gratifying.
Sometimes they're like a time capsule. Je me pose juste la question, est-ce que c'est vraiment exploitable? Est-ce que je termine l'interview en bas à l'épaule?
Ouais, sur le reste.
Ouais.
C'est très bon.
Okay. Like the Rubicon sequence,
Mhm.
the show only lasted one season, and that's mostly what I remember from the show now, which I liked a lot.
Thank you.
It's
Yeah,
it has a meaning that sometimes, even if the show is not successful, you can remember the title sequence.
Yeah, that was always a surprise to me too. I've had people contact me or say, "Oh, I really like those Rubicon titles." And I was like, "Oh, wow!" It wasn't on the air all that long. Sadly, I thought it was a great show, but for some reason it had captured some sort of level of interest and kind of almost come to represent the show, because there were so few episodes, and people were viewing these titles. It came to really represent the show, even though the show had already moved on, right? But I love that kind of psychological thriller. The counterpart titles that are premiering in a little bit have that same feeling, and I felt and it's nice too, having been a title designer and worked on all kinds of content all through the years, to sometimes be able to sometimes return to themes and build on them. I felt my colleague, Jeremy, worked on Manhattan, which again is a lot of this sort of brainy spy thriller, sort of Cold War spy thriller feel, and it's nice. I saw that and I was like, oh, I thought what he did was really wonderful in that really 2D way, but now to approach similar themes, obviously a very different show, but do it work with a similar themes but with a different aesthetic and maybe some more dimensionality and 3D and shot footage was a great challenge. So it's almost like when you get to return to some of the stories or some of these underlying themes, and you can like further the experiment, that's always really fun.
Can you walk us through a process? From day one, when you get a call from, who is it? The network, the production, the showrunner?
Often the showrunner, yeah, the producer and showrunner.
Until the final product.
Yeah,
in
yeah.
A few stages.
Sure. Is there a particular project you'd want to hear about more than the others, or
More in general.
in general?
Actually, yeah.
Okay.
There's a sort of type.
Yeah. Well, one of the great pleasures in doing title design is working with the showrunner, who is the person who is often created or is running the writer's room of a show. And they are responsible for, kind of like the arc of the whole story and the whole kind of creative direction of the show. And that's your, because as you know in television, the directors often switch out per episode. That's different than film, where when you're working on a feature, you're often working with the directors. And the showrunner might be a director as well. But anyway, a television main title will often begin with a television main title will often begin with a call with the showrunner, and that is one of my favorite times. It's sort of like download time when you're just trying to learn everything you can about the show, and you'll be approached, at different points. Sometimes there'll be a few pilot scripts. Sometimes a rough pilot will be cut together. Sometimes they're a little further down the line. That varies, but it's usually, around when the pilot or the first couple of episodes are kind of being shot and put in. And, and it's a conversation about, I'm always asking about like what emotional quality does the showrunner want the audience to feel after viewing the titles. What's that emotion? Is it curiosity? Is it, should we make them laugh because do people need to know it's a comedy? These questions, right? Then the absolute essential thing to do is like just learn everything you can about the show. If we're lucky, maybe we can visit some sets. We can, or they're still shooting. It was fascinating. It was great for Boardwalk Empire. I was in New York at the time, and they had built this amazing boardwalk set, like, from the front, it just looked like shipping containers, but then you would go around the back, and it was just like the whole street or the whole boardwalk, and you could go in and out of the buildings. That was amazing. I just finished something for Counterpart, which is shooting here in LA and Berlin, but the LA part, we were able to see these wonderful sets that they had built in downtown. So just seeing the aesthetic, I always ask to see, as many of the dailies or anything that they can release, just to get an idea of the shooting style. And it's just really about being a sponge, right? Like that's the number one thing, is to like really absorb this world. And often you can just go down a rabbit hole, like, cause it's a lot of these these stories take place in different time periods. So you start to, I love to just, along with my team, like to research the art of the time, the history of the time, what's going on at the time. Black sails was a very particular part in, history where the pirates were coming over from Europe. They were kind of, anti-establishment and setting up societies. What does that look? What was the art of the time? What was the politics of the time? What did the world maps look at the time? And then so you're usually talking, and sometimes the showrunner may even have an idea written or a little snippet of idea, and sometimes it's completely wide open. And I guess people, have always asked, like, how many ideas do you present then when you come back? Because you're supposed to, you go and you talk and you riff on some brainstorming maybe, and then you just go away and kind of have, I think it's very important to have a design phase where you just kind of sit, research, marinate, write ideas down. My team and I, we're pulling references, we're, spitballing ideas, and sometimes, you think of something and it's like, wow, this seems so right for this show. And other times, there's like 6 ideas that come out that and they seem equally all valid and good, so it really, you have to follow the work in that way. It's not a prescribed, there's no formula for that. And then in terms of presenting ideas,
how many people work on a project?
On a project
at this stage when you're doing it like really here?
Yeah, I usually, work with maybe 1 or 2 people in this initial period. It depends, budget has a big, and time. like any other design project or film project. If we have, if there's a bigger budget but limited time, we might have more people on it for more ideas at once. But in general, I feel like we have intimate teams of, anywhere from 1 to 4 people working on this very initial stage, and different, capacities. Like if we know we want to do something in typography's particular, we might pull in somebody who has special skills in that, or, sometimes things will suggest themselves, what kind of artist you work with, right? And so, then you have to go back and present an idea or ideas to the showrunner, and that can take many different forms. Often it's a storyboard. Sometimes even in the beginning, I'll go and just show references, just visual references to see what, we connect with. Like, no, I didn't want that modern, or that looks too sci-fi, or this looks too, period, or whatever, and get that visceral response from the show's creator. And then, often it might be any combination of written idea with keyframes. Sometimes we've drawn boards, sometimes we've mocked them up in Photoshop. Other times, you mentioned Rubicon. Like, I remember we took stills but cut them to a track that kind of like made this little slideshow, because some of the things that we wanted to get across was tension, and the music did that more readily. And it depends too, because sometimes you're going to have access to shoot something, and so you have photography references, and sometimes it's going to be pure graphic. So you have different, you're making things in Illustrator or drawing things. So then hopefully you're honing down on a storyboard or a concept, and there's simultaneously our producers, or, you have a producer and you're figuring out what it would cost. And then you go into production, and that can mean any number of things. For Boardwalk, we had a shoot. We actually, we needed to schedule around them. We had to get our original ideas didn't have Steve Buscemi. Then he became available, and also it became very clear we wanted to focus on him. And so it became all about finding a way to shoot him in July on the hottest day of the year in a 3-piece wool suit. But, and then we base it around that shoot and then do all our effects after. For Counterpart, for instance, we were able to do a shoot, but it was all macro shots of and wide shots of their environments and their props. So there was no talent per se. So it's a completely different kind of shoot. Rubicon had no shoot. That it was more all visual, graphics. Black Sails, we went to production, but it was a purely digital production, where it was like you're going in into production mode, but everything was being shot digitally. So we had all of the statues were created by model makers here in CG models, and then lit and then textured and camera work placed on them. So it's like almost like doing it, CG virtually. We had actually entertained the idea of like maybe we could get them 3D printed and shoot them, or maybe there were even craftsmen or craftspeople who could carve those statues, and maybe we do a live action shoot. But at the end of the day, we actually did it all CG. So, but again, the process is very similar. We'll often work very closely with an editor. We always put together an animatic to figure out the pacing, and that's an interesting question is when the music comes in. We so much of a title is emotional quality is from the music, so it's great when you can talk directly to the composer and go back and forth. We were able to do that with Bear McCreary. But sometimes you're asked for. So much of the music. The music is such an important part, and it's great when you can. We'll often be put in touch with the show's composer, and then we can go back and forth, giving him or her edits, and they can send music back. But in other cases, as for the case in Boardwalk Empire, we actually put on lots of tracks. We put on some Dylan. We put on some. By the Sea, this ditty that was from the 1920s that made it feel period. We put on some, rock and roll. We put on, because sometimes.
Just need to stop for a second.
Yeah. And let me know if you need, me if I'm rambling. Okay.
No, until the last moment, which is
yeah.
Show it to the showrunner. And
Oh, right.
where it can
Right.
go.
Okay, sorry, I got on the music track, which is
No,
also
the
part of
music.
the process.
That's why I'm not stopping.
Okay. Yeah, so sometimes it's about working with the music supervisor, picking just the right track, and you'll be amazed at, like, you pick something and the whole sequence can have a completely different feel by changing the music. And those are all decisions that you work with the showrunner, who's also then, the show will also be showing the network. And depending on the network, you'll get different notes. You know, sometimes I've had title sequences that pretty much the network was pretty hands-on, you know, pretty much let it be very minimal, and others where no, like they really want to get in there and there's some certain things that they want to work out and need to see in the title sequence. And sometimes they it's funny, sometimes I remember in the case of Boardwalk Empire, we were getting ready to do a big shoot that was going to be all about the boardwalk. We're going to show all these details about the boardwalk and never show the main character, Nucky. It was going to be into the taffy shop and see his feet on the faded planks and see the clams and the violence, but just little hints of this world, but never see him. And then I think, you know, our showrunner, Terry Winters, and HBO were like, no, you know, he's the constant in this show. Everything needs to revolve around him. And so it was like a total redo. And honestly, of course, as any, you know, designer, like you're getting hyped up, you know, you're getting ready to shoot this. We're getting 200 extras ready with all the vintage pantyhose and everything. And then we're like, whoa, halt, we're not going to do this shoot. But then, you know, kind of you're like, you know, when you get that back to the drawing board note sometimes. But then sometimes, you know, it is all about understanding where the show is going. So getting that note, I went back to the drawing board and literally working with a storyboard illustrator, Wayne Coe, and we drew up all these sort of scenarios where time lapse might be happening around him, or he was the one thing you saw, and these other things were the variables. And we had different ways of looking at that. And but that note totally made a whole switch, which ended up to be the final sequence. But you know, sometimes it does. You need to need that eye to see, you know, what's important to the show. And
sometimes it's about swallowing your pride in a way.
Oh, being a designer is all about swallowing your pride sometimes. Yeah, like because you're collaborating. Yeah, and you know, there are times all throughout my career where I thought I had this great solution. Oh, it would make this beautiful thing, but it wasn't maybe quite right for the project. And that you always have to take that critical eye and be, what's right? What does this project need? What's gonna make it sing? What's gonna really you know, hit home with either this character or this story, and not get too much into the weeds of all this, you know, what can be terribly exciting production with, you know, and you know, and ideas. So
I have one last question before we go downstairs.
Yeah.
It seems to me, from what people have been telling me, even though I never get real numbers, but that the money for those things has shrinked a little bit, or it's more.
It was never high, unfortunately.
So basically, companies like this one make more money on advertising and less. Is it passion projects?
Yeah, I think that. I mean, I do think, like, working on a title sequence, it is a passion project. It's a labor of love. You know, many people don't realize this, but they aren't terribly high budget projects in either the film or the television world. You know, they represent more of an opportunity to be artistic and think, you know, have that opportunity to work in a space where you can take some risks creatively. So I think that's why most of us who are tile designers enjoy the work, that we enjoy working with these incredibly talented showrunners and these wonderful stories, and being able to work in an art form where we don't necessarily have to be literal, you know, that we're trying to get a feeling, and we are, like, I always think of it as, like, I love a title sequence that asks more questions than it answers, you know, and to be able to create work that can ask questions and tease, you know, and be able to, you know, create symbols or icons for something and not necessarily, it's not a show and tell piece. It's a, come and feel piece. So I think that's sort of the reward. Now, having said that, I think it would be wonderful, to have bigger budgets for some of this work. It's elaborate work. It's very labor intensive. If a title sequence is you can have lots of visual effects and things that are quite expensive to do still in video and film production, and often these last 90 seconds, 2 minutes, and so to be able to have that more compensated, that would be great. I think more and more the title sequence has become more valuable to a show. I mean, they in the age of streaming, you can skip them if you want to, but many people don't. But even if you don't see the title sequence attached to the show as you would have traditionally, you're seeing title sequence in more and more places as people forward them. They really do function as their own little films outside the network or the streaming. Sometimes they're even played as previews for the show or little teases. They've become marketing icons. They've taken on a life of their own, and so they've come to represent the show when you're not watching it, and people are really, I feel, responding to that. So as title sequences get more and more interlaced with the marketing or just the cultural presence of a show, they ultimately have become more valuable, and that would be wonderful to see that paralleled in our budgets. It's my plea to the industry.
Is there a scale you can give me from advertising? Is it 1 to 10, like in budget terms, or?
It's super hard because it all depends. On every budget is a little bit different depending on, as as a filmmaker, if you film on location or here, there's so many variables for doing an advertisement that we've done them down and dirty, and we've done them really high end. So it's unfair. It's a little unfair to say quantitatively, but I feel like in general, the production of these are on the lower end. Yeah, and every title designer I know also works in other areas of film and design, whether it's creating branding or marketing campaigns or advertisements or doing their own. What we're doing that's really interesting, that's we be able to, so working in title design, has naturally led to and facilitated other kinds of work, because what you're doing is you're taking a bigger idea and you're putting it into this really concentrated bit, which is very much done in short content for advertising and marketing. And just in general, the way the world has changed, so we are consuming more and more short video content on our phones, streaming, screens everywhere. It's become a marketplace for more and more short content. And I feel like, as tile designers, or designers in general of short form content, there's going to be a lot more opportunities. And so that's exciting.
Thanks so much. Before we go downstairs, I'm just gonna have you do an exit, as we call that. So if you could just get it. Do you have the thing on your pocket?
I do. I have it. Should I take it? Should I put it in my pocket? It's clipped on.
Do that.
Or I could take it off if you don't need my sound. Or do you need my sound?
Well, we're gonna need it again.
Let's keep it.
Okay. So it's like that. It's like this.
Oh yeah, it's not gonna work.
Should I just take it off or?
Yeah, I think if you put it there and then.
No, it's not gonna work. No.
Il reste juste dévisser, mais laissez la capsule coller.
Ouais, genre je dévisse ça.
Voilà. Ouais.
On va juste la faire sortir du champ par la gauche et après on prendra à l'épaule et on reprendra en se mettant derrière elle ici pour sortir et descendre descendre les escaliers. It's just a matter of 5 seconds.
Yeah.
If you can, no, please sit down
Oh,
where you
okay.
were.
So
You
I
need
have
to
to-
be coherent with
La caméra, je la suis là ou...
Non, là tu fais ça
You need a
et
match.
après tu la suivras.
Non, mais je regarde juste quand elle se lève.
Ouais, oui, tu la suis là, mais tu l'attends qu'elle passe en fait, tu vois, comme une ombre un peu. Parce que là, on va la voir partout. So, whenever you want, you can get up. Yeah, do it now,
Get
please.
up? All right, let's get up.
And then just walk to the stairs on your left. Ça allait?
Bah, pour le moment, j'ai une grosse réflexion. Faisons-le.
Ah,
je vais faire
just-
un mieux.
Je vais lui demander de le faire moins vite.
Is my posture okay?
Yeah, yeah, but just walk slower, a little bit slower.
Okay. Calm. Alright.
Fais-le même de manière vraiment en l'attendant qu'elle passe comme une ombre. C'est pas grave si tu la saisis pas dans le mouvement, parce qu'on a ça.
Ok.
Alright.
All right, walk slow.
Even slower. Ok, c'est bon, de toute